everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and tonight I just got back from watching the new movie If, which stands for Imaginary Friend, in case you didn't see any of the trailers. If, the movie. And yeah, so my first thing I gotta say about this thing is, when you watch the trailers, right, they kind of give you the impression that this is gonna be like a, you know, like a child-friendly, cartoony, like silly CGI characters doing funny things, and like that's what the movie's gonna be, you know, like maybe not quite the Minions style thing, but definitely like, oh, it's gonna be like a kid going on an adventure with a bunch of CGI creatures, you know, and celebrity voices are voicing all of them. And the movie has some of those elements, but that's definitely not what the movie actually is. And I was very surprised by this, because while there's obviously scenes that you see in the trailer where they do silly cartoon things, this movie is actually a lot more heartbreaking, I guess I would say, than you expect, you know. And it actually kind of reminds me of an older type of, like, people might find it schmaltzy, I guess is a word. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, it's very much like, oh, we're gonna get emotional and we're gonna try to make you cry, and that's gonna happen quite a few times, because a lot of this movie has to deal with loss and nostalgia and you know, just things that you lose when you grow up and become an adult, and you know, and that's just a lot of what this thing has to deal with, you know. And I guess the trailers just kind of sell you a more fun, upbeat movie, and this one's a lot more like, you know, it starts off, let me put it this way, there's a lot of hospital scenes. Let me put it that way. And so you're like, oh, okay, all right, we're getting a little bit serious, okay. And so that's what the movie is. So just warning going in that, like, the advertising is not telling you the full story. It is a little bit deeper than what it might seem on the surface, because, you know, all the posters and all the advertisements are pushing the cartoon characters, I guess rightfully so, but it's definitely like, oh, that's not what the movie's about, really, though. Like, those are just, you know what I mean? Those are just like the metaphorical things in the movie. It's not really about, like, you know, the Minions, right? Anyways, but overall, I really enjoyed this movie. You know, I feel like they did a really great job of, like, you know, they're tugging on the heartstrings, but they deliver a lot of powerful messages. And, you know, I do feel like this is something that, you know, families and kids should probably watch, because this is like, oh, hey, we're gonna talk about some serious things, but it's like emotional maturity type stuff, you know. It kind of reminds me of, like, I guess you would say maybe the older Pixar type things, you know, like, you know, it's colorful and you know, all cartoony and cutesy on the surface, but we're gonna go a little bit deeper than that, and there's like a lesson there. So I think they did a really good job with that. Like I said, some people might find it to be a little too schmaltzy, like, oh, they're really trying to make you cry. And it might not work for some people. If you're not in the right headspace, it might not work. But I think for me, I was like, oh, okay, it's working. I can feel it. I understand what they're doing. Having said that, you know, look, I'm a person who likes to overanalyze franchises and fantasy stuff, you know, Star Wars and Marvel, and I think way too much about everything. So this is one of those cases where they introduce a lot of concepts on how this imaginary friends, how these ideas would work, you know, how, like, you know, like, oh, they forget about us when they get older and then they can't see us, but some people can see us, and then, but we do still react to the physical world, but maybe kind of, and, you know, like, the more you think about it, the more questions you have. And the movie's not really, like, about all that world building and answering all these questions on, like, well, how would this work? How would that work? You know? And that's okay. You know, it definitely is one of those things where, like, you just have to let it go. But I do have many questions. You know, I feel like this is something the internet might have fun kind of debating. Like, well, hold on. She saw a picture and the imaginary friend was in the picture. So, but is she the only one that can see it in the picture? Like, how does, you know, just stuff like that. You know, just very interesting questions. So, I do want to get into a little bit of spoilers because there is a twist that, if you're paying attention to things that are not happening about halfway through the movie, you're going to figure out this twist. And I'm going to go into the spoilers, so here's your warning right now. Here we go. I'm going to talk about it. Okay? Okay? Spoilers? Alright, here we go. I'm talking about the spoilers. So, throughout the entire movie, you have this little girl who can see imaginary creatures. They don't really explain why she's able to see all of the imaginary things, because the idea is supposed to be that your imaginary friend, you are the only one that can see them, and then you grow up and you are, you stop needing them, that's how they put it, and so you can't see them anymore, and you kind of forget that they existed, right? But for some reason, not only can she see imaginary friends, but she can see all imaginary creatures, not just, any that could have been hers. It's like she's seeing other people's imaginary friends, and that seems to be a unique ability entirely on her own, which is a thing they never really explain. I don't, maybe there was a throwaway line, but I didn't catch it. I didn't catch any kind of explanation as to like, well, how is she doing this? Because they very much establish like she presents the imaginary friends to another kid, and that kid can't see any of them, and then it's not until he makes his own that he's able to see that one. So I'm like, okay, so she can see every single one of them and no one else can do that. That's, and again, that's just kind of goes into like the world building of like, well, how does this work though? And it's one of those things where like maybe you just shouldn't question some things because it's a child fantasy movie, right? But I do want to get into what the really big twist is, and this is something that like halfway through the movie I noticed it. Ryan Reynolds' character, he shows up and he's already working with all these imaginary friends, and you're thinking to yourself like, okay, well, she can see them all, and so he's just another special human who can see them all, right? And you realize, especially at the beginning of the movie, when they first meet and when he's first explaining everything, and when other imaginary friends are like encounter both of them together, the way that they phrase things, it was very clearly evident that like, oh, they're withholding some kind of information. They're phrasing things in a way that's like, it's not that they're lying, they're just not saying something. And about halfway through, you realize, kind of like The Sixth Sense, no one has talked to Ryan Reynolds except for this little girl. And it's that, oh, he is her imaginary friend. And now of course they kind of like mess with you a little bit because you're like, well, he looks human and all the other ones are CG animated characters. And again, that's just not a thing they really explain. I guess there wouldn't be anything stopping someone from imagining a human looking character, I guess. So fair enough. But yeah, just it turns out that he is an imaginary friend himself, and she had forgotten him. Now, of course, this still brings into the whole question of like, well, how, if she sees him, but she forgot about him, but she meets him again, but somehow that does not trigger the whole, they do like this thing where they glow and they become like, oh, they are remembered now and they can be seen, I suppose. They can be seen and talked to by the person because now they got all glowy and like they're activated again. So that doesn't happen until she genuinely remembers who he is. She like finds an old drawing that she did of him and she's like, oh, that's right, that's who that was. So anyways, that's the big twist. That's not like revealed until the very, very end that he is an imaginary friend himself. And yeah, it is one of those things where like one day I'll probably go back and rewatch this from the very beginning, and I'll, even more closely listen to the way they word things, because I think it was pretty clear. I'm like, oh, okay, he didn't mention like why he's able to see them. He didn't mention like when this all started. He was just like, as long as I can remember, like, oh, because you are an imaginary friend. You're just one of them. Anyways, so it was an interesting twist because I definitely like the trailers present this as like, oh, it's just a business that he had been starting for years, trying to get these imaginary friends like adopted to other people, which, by the way, that is an idea that they kind of try once and then they just kind of drop that immediately, and they completely pivot their plan to, instead of trying to give these imaginary friends to new people who can never see them, it just seems to never work. She gets the brilliant idea, and somehow none of the imaginary friends have ever tried this. I suppose maybe they couldn't because, you know, they didn't have anyone there, any real person there that could help them, and maybe that's why. She gets the brilliant idea to, like, well, why don't we just go back to, you know, the adult version of your original kids, try to remind them of their imaginary friends, and then there you go, you're fine now. And that's basically what ends up happening in the whole second half of the movie, is where they track down the original people, and they try to, you know, they just show a couple of these, and then the end credits kind of show all of these happening for all the different friends of them reuniting with their original creator. Now, this is another thing where, like, you have to just let it go. You can't think too much about it, because you start seeing these sequences of grown adults talking to nobody, you know, talking to an invisible person. And of course they, like, you know, you see them as like, oh, she's hugging a giant CGI dragon, or she's talking to a CGI animated character there. But I'm like, to everyone else, they're not seeing this. They're just seeing a bunch of people talking and reacting to nothing. You know, like, it's like a mass hallucination thing happening. You know, like that. I feel like that would be all over the news. Like, the reports in the thousands of people hallucinating, talking to people that aren't there, and, you know, and again, kind of brings in the question of, like, well, can they react to the physical world? Can they push things? Can they move things? It kind of seems like they can, you know. So I guess there's a way to prove that there is someone there, I guess. Which then it's like, well, why don't they just try to write on a chalkboard or whatever, you know, like, you know, like, it feels, you know, and again, you're not supposed to think about it this much, going way too deep. Anyways, look, I enjoyed the movie. I liked the movie a lot. The twist was an interesting direction to take things, you know. Like I said, about halfway through, you kind of notice, like, oh, no one's talked to him yet. He hasn't, like, been in a room with another adult who has acknowledged his presence. That's not happened yet. And so you kind of notice, like, okay, they were phrasing things very carefully in the beginning. That way, it's not like they were lying and necessarily hiding it from her. They just didn't bring it up, you know. And so at the end, when she finds out, he's like, "Yep, I'm imaginary. I'm not real," you know. So, anyways, it was a very interesting movie. Very much, it was a lot more of a, you know, tug on your heartstrings kind of movie than I thought it was gonna be. And it's not nearly as, like, you know, goofy and silly as some of the trailers kind of make it seem. And I almost feel like, is that gonna hurt the box office? Like, are people gonna watch this with their families, and then they're gonna come out of this saying, like, yeah, it was good, but, you know, it was much more of a sad movie than it was a funny movie. And I wonder if that's gonna, like, you know, affect things, which would kind of suck, because I'm like, these movies don't really get made anymore. But I guess you didn't necessarily advertise it like it was one of these, you know. You kind of made this seem much more like a funny, silly cartoon, and they sprinkle that stuff in, but it's just definitely not what the core of the movie is. So I don't know. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about the movie If, about the twist of Ryan Reynolds being imaginary. It does kind of remind me, I feel like there was, I don't remember the name of it. There was a 90s movie, something Fred, I don't remember. Anyways, there was a 90s movie with a very similar concept where some lady had a childhood imaginary friend that came back and just caused all kind of mischief. It was kind of a similar idea. I almost feel like someone watched that and, like, hey, what if we actually made, like, a good version of that, and you know, not do that, but, you know, have, like, a very similar idea and make that, like, the twist of a movie, almost a Sixth Sense situation. Also, before I go, so there is a reoccurring joke throughout the movie where Ryan Reynolds' character is tripping over an invisible imaginary friend. Not invisible because they can't, like, see him because no one remembers him. Invisible because he was created as invisible, right? So, like, that's just his natural state. And the joke is that he keeps on tripping on him, and it's like, is he small? Is he laying down? Like, it's unclear exactly how he's tripping on him, but he is. In the credits, they credit that character as Brad Pitt, and I think the inside joke there being that Brad Pitt also played the Vanisher in Deadpool 2, another invisible character who never talked, who was on screen for like half a second. And I think he just kind of like, oh, we're doing another invisible character who doesn't talk. Let's just say in the credits that it's Brad Pitt again. So kind of a funny little joke there. He does not get electrocuted. They don't show him at all, but it was just kind of a funny little like, oh, okay, I see the connection. I see why you would do that in the credits. That's pretty funny. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about If, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.